Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In sociolinguistics today, we're about to be talking about sociolinguistics and education. So, in this topic, there will be two presenters who are about to be talking for three materials that we're about to be explaining to you. Our parts, which one is mine and which one is the other presenters. So before that, let me introduce myself to I manually do. My name is Rakasetya. That's the first presenter, and the second one will be Mr. Teguh Pradhana. In this topic, we're going to discuss about the social dialect, education, and there are going to be 5 points that we're going to be discussing. They're restricted, elaborated codes, difference, not deficit, role of the home dialect in education, African American vernacular English, applied sociolinguistics, and the next presenters will be talking about the multilingual education and also education and worldwide English. Our main discussion is talking about inequality. Linguistic inequality is widespread around the world. There will be in social, in education, in every single parts of our daily lives. So, according to Bonin, linguistic inequality is defined by as an unequal social valuation of particular ways of speaking, which due to the indexical nature of language reproduces wider social culture and economic inequalities. In social dialect and education, we're talking about the variety. There are 2 types of variety of a language. The first is a standard variety and the second is non-standard variety. The standard variety is better because it gives the advantage to increase the opportunity of work, education, because they're feeling like they're the same, they're in the same boat. So it gives a better in a social sense, and it gives advantage also for those who use in certain social sense. While the non-standard variety tends to do the opposite effect. It may give the advantage of the social sense because only a few numbers of people will only use non-standard, because it is probably because they're coming from another country or another places that they were not origin from. So they will give a difference. They will show their social status that they're not from there, and people origin from there will give also the opposite effect, which is disadvantage, because they're feeling like they're not on the same boat. Besides, we have 2 kinds of varieties in language. There a standard one and non-standard. Bernstein also give distinction varieties into 2 codes. He said that there are 2 quite distinction varieties of language in use in society. The first is elaborated code and the second is restricted code. So according to Bernstein in 1961, one of the code is elaborated code. Elaborated code, we can say in a simple way, is the standard grammar order. So the speakers in elaborated code is using the standard grammar order. They use the proper grammar structures, and one of the example is they're using complex sentence with good conjunctions, only 1 or 2 conjunctions with subordinate, and also preposition, whether it's temporal nature or logical nature. while the other code, which is restricted code, is the opposite of the elaborated code. It is using simple grammatical, but here the simple grammatical is unfinished sentence. The syntactic form is also rather repetitively giving some more conjunctions, only little subordination, and limited adjectives and adverbs, and impersonal pronoun subject. In simple way, we may say that the elaborated code is the proper language with proper grammar structure that people use, while in a restricted code is like when someone is learning the language because they're not really completely understanding all of them. They're trying to repeat because they might don't really know the goal of the vocabulary that they want to say. That is also the way why they're not giving finished sentence. They're only giving limited adjective and repetitively conjunction. The effect of those varieties from a standard and non-standard, elaborated code and restricted code, they're coming a topic which is talking about the difference, not deficit. There are three main ideas that I got from the book. The first, that the inescapable reality is that people do use language to discriminate in every sense of that word. So the point here that because of they think the difference is deficit, they use that language to discriminate people with a different way. And the second is linguistics difference made themselves be associated with ethnic, religion, and class difference, which lead into discrimination. And the third is varieties of a language do exist, and people do use these varieties for their own purposes. These are the cost of why do they feel that they're different. And the difference, they think that they're not capable enough, and they think it's not different. It's not like Australian and American way. They're different, but they're thinking that is deficit, which shows that the deficit people, we can say, as showing their ethnic, religion, class difference, which make people around them make a discrimination because they think that they're not belong to the place that where they are now, because they're like the minority of the place where they're in. The home dialect in education is differentiated into three ways that can be incorporated into instructions. The first is instrumental programs, the second is accommodation programs, and the third is awareness programs. Instrumental programs is the language is actually used for instructions. It can be used in instructions like in a school, like in a house, sort of things like a daily use instructions. And the next is accommodation programs, allow the particular task. This program is just to accommodate. This is helping for the process in the middle of the activity. Awareness program includes accommodation activities. So this awareness program will help the users to accommodate the activities that they are doing right about that time. Most of the difference, not deficit, or the variety that is happening is in African and American vernacular English and education. Black children show a total lack of ability to use language as a device for acquiring and processing information. black children should be taught the standard variety of the language, and achievement gap is the low academic achievement of American African children compared to children from other ethnic groups. These are that the the previous one I talked about. So because they're not originally from there, they're trying to learn the language there, they're going to be having a lack of ability to use the language in processing information, in learning something new in a school or in educational processes. That is also would be a problem, will be an achievement gap between African and American, which American has the first language as English as their local language too. The problem has years and years always be there between American and African. So Wolfram and the students work to develop a state-approved dialect curriculum now used in public schools in 8th grade social studies classes. So they're trying to make applied sociolinguistics, which may help the African and American to be in average. They're not going to be having difference, and the way they do is by using language attitudes and how language use. Well, Teguh making teachers training on sociolinguistics and applied linguists. Teguh also making sort of things like workshop, educational conference, publishing articles for teachers to make sure that teachers know how to teach African and American at the same place and probably at the same time. So ladies and gentlemen, that is a part of mine which we were discussing about social dialect and education. There are 5 points that I already told you about restricted, elaborated codes. Before that I talked about the a standard and non-standard, variety and difference and not deficit, why they come in, the role of home, dialect in education, African American vernaculars, English, and the applied sociolinguistics from researchers to not make any separation between them. And then the next discussion is going to be from the next presenter, Mr. Teguh. He will talk about the multilingual education. There are 3 topics: ideologies, use of minority language in the classroom, and the third is elite and immigrant bilingualism. And the next is about education and worldwide English. How is actually the circle of English, the elite closure, and also English in Europe, what is happening. So thank you. I give it back to the second presenter, to Mr. Teguh.
Hello everyone, now it's my part to present this presentation, this discussion about sociolinguistics and education. My name is Mohammad Teguh Pradhana. Let's start my part. The major topic in research on multilingual education is, of course, the language ideologies which inform educational program, teacher practice, and student participation. The first is we are about to discuss is about the suggestion from Wright and Boogie. I don't know how to say it, whether Boogie or Bogie. Yes. The issues involved here is the legitimation of the home language of children, the social identities that are related to these languages, and the issues of exactly how the home language might be used in the classroom. Like when we are Japanese and we are studying in Jakarta, maybe the use of Japanese is being legitimated. Understand what I mean? And the second one is two-way immersion programs in which Anglophone children learn a minority language. You know Anglophone? Yes. And like the majority learn the minority language, and minority language speaking children learn English. So there are two-way immersion programs, both between the majority and the minority learn their language for each other. And the second is language choice by the teacher, like consistent use of the minority language by the teacher. Hopefully, as stated by Wright and Bogie, hopefully it can positively contribute to the contact environment in multilingual classroom settings. The second discussion about this is the use of minority languages in the classroom. However, we have Ramirez report 1991 submitted to the US Department of Education. It was the result of an 8-year longitudinal study of over 2,300 Spanish-speaking children from 554 classrooms. Yes, and his report, has an evidence and accumulation that immersing children in the target language is not the most effective means of teaching them that language. Instead, bilingual education with some instruction in the home language leads to the academic success in the long term. It is what has been said by the report of Ramirez. And it found that the more years of bilingual education children had, the better they performed on English standardized tests in the 6th grade. As you know that we have standarisasi bahasa Inggris, yes, and also there are some unique English accents. There are several things to note about this finding. The first is the positive effect of bilingual education in test scores was not always found earlier than the 6th grade. As you have known together, acquiring a language for academic success always takes time. Not in the short time, but the long-term effectiveness of first learning to read in one's first language is definitely higher than having children learn to read in language they are in the process of acquiring. And the second things that you have to note about this is that there is a superficially counterintuitive result that children who have more schooling in Spanish do better on tests in English than children who have more exposure to English. Of course, this finding is linked to the first point, that the children who are in bilingual education programs simply have better literacy skills in the long run because they learn to read in a language they speak fluently as opposed to a language they are learning. Thus, in this discussion, it is not simply exposure to English, sometimes it's called time on task, but the nature of exposure to English that is important.
The most successful bilingual programs are two-way immersion programs, also called dual language programs. These programs clearly benefit the children by providing them with instruction in their dominant language and exposing them to English through Anglophone peers. Such programs have social and physiological advantages which contribute to academic success. Genesee and 2006 show that English language learners who participate in two-way immersion programs are less likely to drop out of school and also have higher long-term academic achievement and show more positive attitudes on the whole toward school. And the rest you can read by yourself in the slides.
Next, there are two types of bilingualism. The first is immigrant bilingualism and the second is elite bilingualism. What it means by immigrant bilingualism is usually low status. Immigrant languages are associated with poor and disenfranchised segments of society. This association causes many people to associate bilingual with stigmatized identities in society. They then view speaking two languages as something which is not desirable. On the other hand, elite bilingualism means speaking two languages with which both carry high status. I'm so sorry if there are trucks, voices in this recording because I record this beside the road. In many countries, speaking an international language such as English, in addition to the national language, creates elite bilingualism. Now, we are going to discuss education and worldwide English. There are three discussions in this slide. That is standard English versus Singapore English, and then affect students' attitude, and then the use of Singapore English in the classroom might be beneficial. Let's look at the student attitudes toward Singapore English and standard English. In order to ascertain what is the best pedagogical practice, given that the overall goal is for the children to learn standard English, but students, they live in an environment where they are exposed to Singapore English, which differs from the standard one. The result from the attitudinal survey showed that the students appreciate the value of standard English, but that they do not feel that Singapore English is bad English. Use of this variety is an important part of their Singaporean identity. However, such a view of the use of Singapore English is very dependent on context and the interlocutors. So, localization, you will find the discussion about the localization. The situation in the United States with standard English and what is it? Worldwide English, that there has been some success in using AAVE in the classroom as a means to help children acquire literacy skills. They interpret the result of their survey as an indication that the use of Singapore English in the classroom might be beneficial. So it is okay if the teacher want to mix the standard English and let the students to speak their own English. Next. There are three circles of English. The first is inner circle, the second outer circle, and the third expanding circle. There are also hybridization interaction between global influence and local cultures. The first is the inner circle. It's described as regions in which English is used for almost all functions by the majority of the population. For example, the United States, the United Kingdom, or Australia. That's what it means by the inner circle. The second one is the outer circle, contains countries in which there are original non-native but institutionalized uses of English. For example, Philippines or South Africa. And then the third is expanding circle, comprises countries in which English is learned as a foreign language and in which it plays an increasingly important role in economic development. The different role of English in these societies contributes to differences in approaches to the use of English in schooling. Next. Allied closure, as you can read in this slide stated by Scotton, is a type of social mobilization strategy by which this person in power establish their power or maintain their power and privilege via linguistic choice. And the concept of allied closure has been used to describe how people with power use language to reproduce their privileged position. And Maya Scotton used this concept in her work in Africa, where colonial languages such as English, French, and Portuguese are spoken by a minority of the population, and limiting participation in higher education and government to those who speak those languages is an effective gatekeeping measure. Research by Wright discusses the historical situation of the status of English in South Africa, as well as the contemporary everyday practices which reproduce the dominance of English. Wright concludes that there is little challenge to English in its role in economic development, but also that the local languages will continue to be spoken. That is, English will undoubtedly retain its dominance, but not at the expense of local language, because of the focus on multilingualism in national language policy. It is possible that high-quality English instruction could be made available to the larger population. More people knowing English well would allow continuation in the development in international trade without limiting participation in this economic activity to an elite few. And English in Europe, sometimes described as a threat to the survival of other languages in Europe, and its widespread use challenges the official Europe United Uni Eropa policy on promoting linguistic diversity. There is some speculation about the long-term effects of the increased use of English throughout Europe, including positing the development of Euro-English, which is distinct from varieties spoken in inner circle countries, or at the very least, the emergence of local, communicatively focused uses of English, which contrast with a prescriptive focus on norms from the inner circle. In some cases, the spread of English is equated with the spread of capitalism and consumerism, like stated by the Philipson. In terms of the domains of use, Swedish, very few responding, felt that the use of English in their education was a disadvantage for them personally or for the university as a whole. The example of Europe illustrates that English is not only seen as a threat to other language in post-colonial context or in situation in which it is the dominant language spoken in community. While in cases where students speak non-standard dialects in communities where minority languages are spoken, and in countries where English is not the community language but is the medium of education. In all of this context, social inequalities are perpetuated by ideologies which privilege certain ways of speaking and social structure which impede access to high status code for some portion of the population. Okay, thank you very much. This is the last slide of our presentation done by Teguh and Raka. Thank you very much for listening, if you listen. Good day.